We continue the journey in the book of Judges with chapter 10. We just had the terrible chapter of Elimelech, this usurper. Like we said, in many ways, the first king of Israel. We think of Shaul. It's the first king who's self-appointed, and he was just killed. And we're told, Vayakam acharei Elimelech, lo shiat Yisrael, Tola ben Pua ben Dodo, ish Yisachar, v'yoshev bashamir bahar Ephraim. With the next judge of Israel is from the tribe of Yisachar. But he lived in the Shamir, in the hill country of Ephraim. Vayishpot Yisrael esrim v'shalosh shana vayamot vayikaver b'Shamir. And he judges Israel for 23 years, and he's buried in Shamir. We don't know anything about him. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. I can't tell you. We have very little information about him. The next, after him, Vayakam acharav Yair Hagiladi vayishpot Yisrael esrim ushtayim shana. The next person we have is Yair Hagiladi, who judges Israel for 22 years. And we're told a little bit of information about him. Vayilo shloshim banim rochvim al shloshim ayarim ushloshim ayarim lahem yikru chavot sha'ir ad hayom hazeh asher be'eretz Hagilah. He had, what did he have? He had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys. And there's a good translation here. Safari has it. I think it's from the JPS. He had 30 burrows, and they own 30 burrows. The first, burros, donkeys, burrows, and the second one, burrows, like the 5 boroughs of New York, because in Hebrew there's a little bit of a, right, it's ayarim for donkeys and ayarim for cities. And that's all that we know about him. He has 30 cities, he has 30 kids, he's got, and Vayomot Yair Vayikaber b'Kamon. And Yair dies, and he's buried in Kamon. We don't know anything really about him, but the one interesting thing that maybe we can note about him is that his wealth. When Gideon was called by God, he said, I'm from the youngest family, I'm a little nothing, I'm a little nobody, I'm not wealthy, I don't have influence, I don't have power. And here, what do we have? We see that a future judge is somebody, the only thing we can say about him is that he had a lot of land, a lot of kids, which we know Gideon sort of transformed into in some ways when Gideon all of a sudden, right later on in his life, it talks about him having 70 kids. And because he had 70 kids, we know that means that he had many wives, which the text told us that he had many wives. And now we continue, verse 6. Now things will get more interesting. Vayosifu b'nei Yisrael asot hara b'nei Hashem v'yavdu et habalim bet ashtarot bet Elohei Aram bet Elohei Tzidon bet Elohei Moab bet Elohei b'nei Ammon bet Elohei Plishtim v'yazvu et Hashem v'lo avaduhu. So b'nei Yisrael, stage cycle number 1, worship all of the idols. And it's interesting here, it's not just one idol like in the past. We had the Baal Brit, the Asherah. What do we have here, right? We have the Baalim, the Ashtarot, the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of Ammon, the gods of Plishtim. Any idol they could find, they went and worshipped. And, so it's really seems that things are going downhill. Stage number 2, God gets upset. An enemy, this time the Philistines and the Ammonites, so they're coming from the east and the west, take control over Bnei Yisrael. Vayiratsu, vayirotsu et Bnei Yisrael b'shana, and they battered and shattered Bnei Yisrael. There's another there also sort of play on words, Ra'atsu and Rotzitsu. Shmona Esrei Shana ve'kol Bnei Yisrael asher be'evar Yarden be'eretz Hamori asher Bilgad. For 18 years, all the Israelites beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites and Gilad. So we're going to focus, even though they're being attacked all over, on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. Reuven, Gad, Menashe, the tribes that are there. We're up towards the northern territories of that. But it wasn't just there. That's where we're going to concentrate. But the enemies also come in to what today would be the state of Israel, the western side of the Jordan River, and attack there as well. And their Bnei Yisrael is really suffering. Vayzaku Bnei Yisrael Adonai le'mor chatanu lach v'chi azavnu et Eloheinu v'na'avod et haba'alim. And Bnei Yisrael have an admission of guilt. They say, we left you, and we have been worshiping the idols. We left you, God. And it's an admission of guilt, and that's stage, usually stage 3. Bnei Yisrael, or stage 2, 3, Bnei Yisrael leave God. God sends an enemy. Bnei Yisrael cry out to God. But here, we're going to have a change. And continue in verse 11. Vayomer Adonai al Bnei Yisrael, Halomi Mitzrayim min Amorim min Bnei Ammon min Plishtim v'Tzidonim v'Amalek u'Ma'on lachatzu atchem v'titz'aku elai v'oshia atchem miyadam. God says to them, the Egyptians, the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, the Tzidonim, the Amalek, the Ma'on, right? All of these people, they oppressed you and you cried out to me and I saved you from them. And it's sad. It sounds a lot like so much of Jewish history. We've all seen the maps of all the places in Europe that Jews were exiled from, that there were pogroms in, etc., etc. And so to me, it's a sad verse that it's thousands of years later, and we can place different nations instead of these nations in there, and it would still sadly be very true. And God says, however, and this would not continue necessarily with how Bnei Israel is today, but you guys, even though I saved you, what happened? You left me. You forgot me. And therefore, I'm done with you. I'm not going to save you anymore. Go and cry out to the gods who you have chosen. Let them save you. This is echoing almost, right, what Yoash, the father of Gidon, said after Gidon went and destroyed the Baal. And the people said, we're going to go kill your son. Hand it to us. And he said, let Baal fight his own wars. What does he need you to fight for? Let him contend with my son. God says, you go, let these people fight for you. Vayom Ruvnei Israel Adonai. Chatanu. Asa talanu kicholato beinecha ach hatzilenu na hayom hazeh. Bnei Israel say to God, we admit, we sinned. It's Yom Kippur. We admit our sins. Do with us as you wish. You want to punish us in the long term. You want to take some of your special protection away from us, whatever you want to do. But now we are so tortured, oppressed. We're shattered that we need to be saved at this moment. We're continuing in verse 16. And so they remove the foreign gods and they serve God. But it says, but God could not bear the miseries of Israel. And there's a question there. What does that mean? God could not bear the miseries. He could not bear the fact that they were being tortured, that they were being oppressed by other nations, and God can't bear it anymore. There's some who say it that way, and therefore God eventually is going to come and they're going to be saved. But that doesn't seem like it, because we're going to have this story of the Shofet, who we will reveal soon, although not in this chapter. Or does it mean that God could no longer bear their sort of like their returns, their tshuva, which was temporary and not permanent? God didn't want it anymore. You know, how many times? What is it? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. God said, enough of shame on me. Enough with you guys tricking me and telling me for 5 minutes that you're going to be loyal and obedient, and then you're gone. So maybe it's that God, which is a much more intriguing idea and a much more shocking idea. God says, I've had enough. It echoes that word vatiksar. You go back to the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, after Moshe comes and then finally agrees and goes to Paro and says, let my people go. And Paro sort of like laughs in the face of Moshe and makes things worse for Bnei Israel. And Moshe comes to Bnei Israel, and it says that they were also kotzer ruach. They couldn't listen to Moshe because their spirit, they had no room. They had no vision. They had no imagination to believe that they would be free because they were so tortured for so long. They felt katzah. They felt weak. And so here it is not Bnei Israel who feel weak, although they do as well, but it's God who feels weak. And so it's a very intriguing sort of phrase. And again, just coming back to it, the big difference here, in the past when Bnei Israel have cried out, yes, in the past with Gidon, we had a little Navi who appeared, and then we switched to the story of Gidon. But here we have not had any sort of shofet, any person appointed who's going to save Bnei Israel. And we continue now in verse 17, only 2 more verses in this shorter chapter. Vayitzaku v'nei Ammon. So we have that same word. Bnei Israel are za'ak. They're crying out to God. God is not ready to hear their cries. He's had enough of it. And now it's vayitzaku. So the very same word with Ammon. This doesn't mean Ammon's crying out to God. This is the cry of battle. Vayachanu ba Gilad, and they camp in the Gilad. Vayasfu v'nei Israel vayachanu ba Mitzpah. And Bnei Israel gather and they encamp in Mitzpah. Vayomru ha'am sarei ha-Gilad ishel re'ehu. And the people of Gilad, the officers, the people in charge, every person's talking to each other, and they say, Mi ha'ish, It's not like we have a davening. Mi aish hachafetz chaim oev yamim lirotov. This is mi aish. Who is the person who is going to step up? Asher yachel ilachem b'nei Amo. Who's going to step up and fight against Ammon? Yela rosh l'chol yushvei Gilad. That person will be the head of all of the people of Gilad. And again, here's the big difference. In all the past, we had a shofet who was mentioned, whether it be Devorah, whether it be Gidon, whether it be Ehud, whether it be Otniel. They were all mentioned. God cried out. God sent it to them. That person gathered together the army. Wasn't just Devorah and Barak. Here, completely different. Here, Bnei Israel are still searching for someone. And this is a point, and maybe it starts with this earlier Shoftim, Yair, we don't know, but the next two leaders, the next two Shoftim, we'll meet him in the next chapter, Yiftach, and the much more famous Shofet, Shimshon, are extremely flawed leaders and characters. And we're getting to a point where there's a phrase that they say in the Talmud, where, each generation gets the leader they deserve. And Yiftach is going to be the person they get in a generation. And Shimshon is going to be the person they get in a generation, because those were generations which were not worthy to have a Shmuel Hanavi. We're not worthy to have a Moshe Rabbeinu. And so we're at a point where there's sort of a shift in the book. God is not as willing, in a sense, to send them a Moshiach. Of course, they will get somebody who comes to save them. They will get a judge. They will get somebody who is going to lead them. But it's being done in a very, very different fashion. And it's a very different moment in our book. And we'll continue come next week with more of the details of this next Shofet and his very intriguing story.